I'm Kara Sterling, 42, and I built a $1 billion luxury skincare empire from a single kitchen stove. The air inside the Metropolitan Museum of Art smelled of expensive lilies and even more expensive ambition. Tonight was supposed to be my coronation. I stood at the head of the long banquet table, looking out over the Temple of Dendur. The ancient stone walls were bathed in the soft, golden light of my brand, Lumina. 10 years. It had taken me 10 years of sleepless nights, maxed out credit cards, and bloody knuckles to get here. I smoothed the silk of my champagne-colored gown. It felt cool and heavy against my legs, a reassuring armor against the world. My husband, Richard, stood to my right. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, his smile practiced and perfect for the flashing cameras. To my left sat my brother, Julian, and his wife, Beatrice. I glanced at them. Julian was beaming, raising his champagne flute to a potential investor. But Beatrice looked like she was going to be sick. Her skin was distinctively gray, a stark contrast to the emerald green of her dress. She was gripping the tablecloth so hard her knuckles were white. I frowned, a flicker of annoyance sparking in my chest. Beatrice always found a way to make these events difficult. She was the nervous link in our family chain, always overwhelmed by the opulence that my hard work had provided. I tried to catch her eye, to offer a reassuring nod or a silent command to pull it together. She wouldn't look at me. Her eyes were darting around the room, scanning the waiters, scanning the exits. "Ladies and gentlemen," the master of ceremonies announced, his voice booming through the hall. The crowd quieted, 500 faces turning toward me. To celebrate a decade of brilliance, we present the Lumina Gold Dessert Experience. This was the moment. The servers streamed out from the kitchen in a synchronized wave. They carried silver trays held high above their heads. On each tray sat a single, perfect truffle. It wasn't just chocolate. It was a custom creation dusted in 24-karat edible gold, filled with the rare Manuka honey that was the signature ingredient in my best-selling face cream. It was a symbol. It was a statement that we had arrived. A server placed the tray in front of me with the reverence of a priest placing an offering on an altar. The gold dust shimmered under the museum lights. I picked up the delicate sphere. The chocolate felt cool and smooth against my fingertips. I could feel the eyes of the press on me. I knew the photographers were waiting for the shot. The billionaire CEO taking the first bite of the golden decade. I smiled, tilting my chin up slightly to catch the best light. I brought the truffle to my lips. My mouth watered in anticipation of the rich, dark cocoa. The room was silent, holding its collective breath. "Don't eat that!" The scream didn't sound human. It tore through the polite silence like a jagged knife. I froze, the chocolate hovering an inch from my mouth. My heart slammed against my ribs. I turned my head, confusion clouding my vision. Beatrice was moving before my brain could process what was happening. She didn't just stand up, she launched herself. It was a frantic, uncoordinated lunge across the table. Her arms swept out in a violent arc. She ignored the crystal wine glasses. She ignored the centerpiece of white orchids. Her target was my hand. "No!" she shrieked again, her voice cracking with hysteria. Her hand struck my wrist with shocking force. My fingers spasmed. The golden truffle flew from my grasp, but she wasn't done. She kept moving, her momentum carrying her body onto the table. She shoved the silver tray away from me as if it were on fire. The tray spun through the air. It hit the marble floor with a crash that sounded like a gunshot. Glass shattered. Silver clattered. The echo bounced off the ancient Egyptian temple walls, amplifying the violence of the moment. I stumbled back, my heel catching on the hem of my gown. I grabbed the edge of the table to steady myself, gasping for air. A shard of broken crystal skittered across the tablecloth and nicked my cheek. I felt the sharp sting before I realized I was bleeding. Silence, absolute deafening silence. The jazz band had stopped playing. The chatter had died instantly. 500 of the most influential people in the world were frozen in place, staring at us. I could feel the heat rushing up my neck, a burning flush of humiliation. My perfect night, my coronation. It lay in ruins on the floor, surrounded by scattered gold dust and broken glass. I looked down at Beatrice. She was standing amidst the wreckage of the gala dinner, her chest heaving. Her hair had come loose from its elegant bun, hanging in wild strands around her face. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at the smashed truffle on the floor with wide, terrified eyes. She looked like a woman who had just seen a ghost or a murder. "Beatrice," I whispered, my voice trembling with a mix of rage and shock. "What have you done?" She slowly lifted her head. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time in my life I saw true, unadulterated terror in them. She reached out a shaking hand and gripped my wrist, her nails digging into my skin so hard it hurt. "I couldn't let you," she choked out, her voice barely audible over the ringing in my ears. "Let me what?" I hissed, pulling my arm away. "Embarrass us in front of the entire industry." She shook her head frantically. Tears were streaming down her face now, cutting tracks through her heavy makeup. "They're watching, Kara," she whispered, her eyes darting to the shadows at the edge of the room. "They're all watching." I looked around the room. I saw the shocked faces of my investors. I saw the delighted smirks of the tabloid reporters, their pens already moving across their notepads. I saw my husband, Richard, staring at Beatrice with an expression I couldn't place. Was it anger, confusion, or was it fear? My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my chest. The air suddenly felt too thin to breathe. I looked back at the smashed truffle on the floor. It was just chocolate. It was just a stupid, expensive piece of chocolate. But the way Beatrice was looking at it made my stomach churn. "It's poisoned," she breathed. The words were so quiet I almost missed them, but they hit me with the force of a physical blow. "What?" I asked, my voice hollow. "Don't eat it," she sobbed, collapsing back into her chair, burying her face in her hands. "Please, God, tell me you didn't swallow any of it." The room spun. I touched my lips where the gold dust still lingered. I looked at the server who had brought the tray. He was gone. I stared at the empty space where the server had been standing just seconds ago. My brain was trying to bridge the gap between the golden truffle on the floor and the word Beatrice had just whispered. Poisoned. The syllable seemed to hang in the air, heavier than the humidity, colder than the marble. I looked back at Beatrice. She was trembling so violently that her emerald dress rippled like water in a storm. She opened her mouth to speak again, to explain, to save me, but she never got the chance. "Beatrice, that is enough." The voice boomed from my left, authoritative and sharp. It was Julian. My brother didn't move like a concerned husband. He moved like a soldier neutralizing a threat. He was out of his chair in a blur of motion, closing the distance between them in a single stride. His hand clamped down on Beatrice's shoulder. I saw her wince. I saw the way her body went rigid, not with relief, but with a sudden, paralyzing spike of fear. "I am so sorry, everyone," Julian shouted, his voice pitching perfectly to reach the back of the room without screaming. He forced a laugh, but it sounded brittle. It sounded like dry leaves being crushed underfoot. "My wife has been under a tremendous amount of stress lately," he announced, turning his charismatic smile toward the stunned investors. "She's having a bit of an episode. The medication, you know how it is." He was lying. I knew Beatrice better than anyone. She didn't take medication. She didn't have episodes. She was the most grounded person I knew until tonight. Julian, I stammered, stepping forward. She said, she doesn't know what she's saying, Kara. Julian cut me off, his tone dismissive. He didn't look at me. He was looking over the heads of the crowd, signaling to the shadows. Two men in dark suits materialized from the edges of the room. They weren't the regular museum security. They were private detail, my detail. Escort Mrs. Sterling to the car, Julian commanded. Take her home immediately. The men moved in on Beatrice like wolves circling a wounded deer. No, Beatrice gasped, shrinking away from Julian's grip. No, Julian, don't let them take me, you know. You know what they did. Stop it, Beatrice, Julian hissed, his fingers digging deeper into her flesh. I saw the white indentations his fingertips made against her skin. That wasn't comfort, that was restraint. One of the guards grabbed Beatrice's upper arm, the other grabbed her waist. They hauled her up from the chair with a roughness that made my stomach turn. Kara, Beatrice screamed my name. It was a raw, guttural sound that stripped the polish right off the evening. Look at the chocolate, look at it. Get her out of here, Richard barked from beside me. I turned to look at my husband. Richard's face was a mask of furious embarrassment. He wasn't looking at Beatrice with concern. He was looking at the cameras. He was looking at the ruin of his reputation. Richard, stop them, I pleaded, grabbing his sleeve. She's terrified. She's hysterical, Kara, Richard snapped, pulling his arm away from me. She's ruining everything. I looked back at Beatrice. They were dragging her backward toward the heavy double doors of the Temple of Dendur. Her heels skid uselessly against the polished stone floor. She stopped fighting the guards. She stopped screaming. She just locked eyes with me. Her pupils were blown wide, swallowing the irises. It was a look of pure, unadulterated desperation. It was the look of a woman who knew she was being sent to her execution. Don't trust them, she mouthed. No sound came out, but I read the lips perfectly. Then the doors swung open and they shoved her into the night. The heavy thud of the doors closing felt like a gavel coming down. Silence rushed back into the room to fill the void Beatrice had left. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a bird trapped in a cage. I felt like I was going to vomit. I looked down at the smashed truffle on the floor. The gold dust was scattered across the marble like crime scene evidence. Ladies and gentlemen, Julian's voice broke the trance. He was standing right next to me now. He had stepped over the broken glass and the ruined dessert to stand at my side. Please forgive the interruption, he called out, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. Let's not let a little family drama spoil the celebration of Lumina, he signaled to the band. The jazz started up again, hesitant at first, then louder, trying to drown out the memory of Beatrice's screams. The waiters rushed forward with brooms and dustpans, sweeping away the gold, sweeping away the warning. I stood frozen. I felt a hand land on my shoulder. It was heavy. It was firm. I looked up into Julian's face. He was smiling, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were cold, calculating, assessing the damage. He squeezed my shoulder. His grip tightened until I could feel the bones grinding together. It mirrored the way he had held Beatrice just moments before. It wasn't a hug. It was an anchor holding me in place. He leaned in close, his breath hot against my ear, smelling of scotch and mint. Smile, Kara, he whispered, his voice low and soothing, terrifyingly calm. Everyone is watching, you need to pull it together. She said it was poison, Julian, I whispered back, my voice shaking. She's crazy, he murmured, his fingers digging harder into my trapezius muscle, paralyzing me. She's been losing her mind for weeks. I didn't want to worry you. She didn't look crazy, I said. She looked scared. She's jealous, he countered smoothly. Jealous of your success, jealous of this night, now drink some champagne and smile. He pulled back and looked at me. There was a hardness in his expression that I had never seen before, a warning, do as you are told. I looked around the room. The guests were returning to their conversations, but their eyes kept darting back to us. I looked at the floor where the truffle had been. It was gone. The floor was clean. As if nothing had happened, but the phantom sting of Beatrice's slap still burned on my wrist, and the terror in her eyes was branded onto my retinas. I raised my chin. I forced the corners of my mouth up into the smile that built this empire. But inside, my blood had turned to ice, because I realized something terrifying. The server who brought me the truffle hadn't just disappeared. I watched the kitchen doors swing open. The head chef was shouting at a sous chef. I could read his lips too. Where is he? The server wasn't one of ours. Beatrice was right. Someone had tried to kill me, and my brother and husband had just dragged the only witness out of the building. I'm Serafina Vance, 34 years old, and I turned a garage experiment into a global biotech empire that just reshaped the entire energy sector. But right now, I didn't feel like a CEO. I felt like a fugitive in my own life. The gala had officially ended 2 hours ago. I had told Richard I had a migraine. I told him to bring the car around the front while I used the ladies' room to splash water on my face. It was the first lie I had told my husband in 7 years of marriage. But as I watched him walk away, checking his watch with an impatience that made my skin crawl, I realized it wouldn't be the last. I didn't go to the bathroom. I slipped off my heels. I moved silently through the service corridors I had memorized from the venue schematics during the planning phase. I waited in a supply closet that smelled of ammonia and bleach until the sounds of the cleanup crew faded. Now the temple of Dendyr was silent. The massive room was bathed in the eerie blue-gray light of the moon filtering through the glass ceiling. It looked like a graveyard. I crept out from the shadows, my stockinged feet silent on the cold stone, my breath hitched in my throat. I felt exposed. I felt like prey. I made my way toward the head table. The staff had been thorough. The floor was gleaming. The shattered glass was gone. The gold dust had been vacuumed away. Despair crashed over me like a wave. They had scrubbed the crime scene. Julian was efficient. He always was. I dropped to my knees, ignoring the sharp pain as my knees hit the hard marble. I began to crawl along the perimeter of where the table had stood. Come on, I whispered to myself, my voice trembling. Please. I needed proof. I needed to know that Beatrice wasn't crazy. Because if she wasn't crazy, then I was sleeping next to a monster. I ran my hands along the floor, feeling for anything sticky, anything out of place. Nothing. I crawled toward the heavy velvet drapes that line the lower platform. My hand brushed against the thick, trailing fabric of a discarded table runner that had been tossed onto a pile of linens waiting for pickup. It was a deep, royal blue velvet. I started to lift it, intending to check underneath. Then I saw it. Caught in the heavy fold of the fabric, smeared against the velvet pile. A dark brown smudge, and a chunk of gold-flecked truffle. It must have been kicked there during the struggle when the guards hauled Beatrice away. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I thought it might crack the bone. I reached into the clutch I had tucked into my dress. I pulled out a small, plastic Ziploc bag, the one I usually kept my emergency migraine medication in. I dumped the pills out onto the floor. I didn't care about them. I turned the bag inside out over my hand, using it like a glove. I reached for the truffle. My fingers were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I scooped up the dark, sticky mass. I carefully inverted the bag, sealing the chocolate inside. I held it up to the moonlight. It looked innocent. It looked delicious. But then I brought the bag closer to my face. I unzipped it just an inch. I took a tentative sniff. The smell hit me instantly. It wasn't just the rich, earthy aroma of dark chocolate. Underneath the cocoa and the sugar, there was something else, something sharp, something metallic. It smelled like old pennies and bitter almonds. I gagged. I zipped the bag shut, my hands fumbling with the seal. The smell triggered a memory so visceral it made the room spin. I sat back on my heels, the plastic bag clutched to my chest. The dizziness. I squeezed my eyes shut. For the past 3 months, I had been plagued by spells. That's what Julian called them. Spells. I would be in a board meeting and suddenly the room would tilt. I would be reading a contract and the words would swim off the page. I had blamed it on exhaustion. I had blamed it on the stress of the Lumina launch. I had blamed it on myself. But Julian had been there every single time. I remembered the morning routine. The image was so clear it burned. Julian standing in my kitchen, his sleeves rolled up, looking every bit the doting brother. "Drink up, Fina," he would say, handing me the green smoothie. "I put extra iron in it today, you look pale." He insisted on making them. He wouldn't let the housekeeper do it. "It's my secret recipe," he'd joke, "the fuel of champions." He watched me drink every drop. He would stand there leaning against the granite island, smiling that charming, protective smile until the glass was empty. I looked down at the bag in my hand. The metallic smell. It was the same. It was the same aftertaste that lingered at the back of my throat every morning. I had thought it was the kale. I had thought it was the wheatgrass. I gasped, the air rushing into my lungs with a ragged sob. He was poisoning me, my brother, my right hand, the only family I had left after our parents died. He wasn't protecting me, he was killing me slowly. And Richard, I thought of my husband's face when Beatrice screamed. The embarrassment, the anger, but not surprise. He hadn't been surprised. A wave of nausea rolled through me, violent and sudden. I clamped a hand over my mouth. I was alone in a dark museum with a bag of poison in my hand, and the two men who were supposed to love me most in the world wanted me dead. Why? The company, the money, the life insurance policy worth $50 million that Richard had insisted we update last month. "Did you hear that?" A voice echoed from the upper balcony. I froze. My blood turned to ice. I knew that voice. It was the head of my security detail, the same man who had dragged Beatrice out. "I thought I saw movement down by the temple," another voice replied. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness above me, sweeping across the stone walls. I scrambled backward, pressing myself into the shadows of the linen pile. I clutched the plastic bag so tight my fingernails dug into my palm. "Probably just a rat," the first voice grunted. "This place is old." "Mr. Sterling said to sweep the room again," the second voice insisted. "He said he wants to be sure nothing was left behind." Mr. Sterling, my husband. He wasn't looking for a lost earring. He was looking for this. He was looking for the evidence I was currently holding against my heart. The beam of light swung down, tracking across the floor. It moved closer, closer. It hit the spot where I had just been kneeling. It illuminated the scattered migraine pills I had dumped on the floor. "Hey," the guard called out, "look at this." I stopped breathing. I pressed my hand against my chest, trying to silence the frantic thudding of my heart. If they found me now, there would be no public scene. There would be no screaming. I would just disappear, just like the server. I looked at the service exit 10 feet away. I had to move, I had to run, and I couldn't go home. I'm Serafina Vance, 34 years old, and until tonight I thought I was the CEO of the world's most advanced clean energy firm, not a lab rat in my own home. I didn't take my car. I knew Richard tracked the Tesla through the app on his phone. He called it safety. I now knew it was surveillance. I had sprinted from the service exit of the museum to the nearest subway station, ignoring the stares directed at my torn gown and stockinged feet. I rode 3 stops into Queens. I found a 24-hour rental kiosk and paid cash for a beat-up sedan that smelled like stale cigarettes and pine air freshener. Now I was gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. Every set of headlights in my rearview mirror made my heart hammer against my ribs. I was convinced they were following me. I was convinced Julian was right behind me, ready to pull me over and offer me another green smoothie. I pulled into the industrial park at 2:00 a.m. The building was nondescript. Brick, steel bars on the windows, no signage. This was the sanctuary of Talia Thorne. We had survived organic chemistry together at MIT. While I went corporate, Talia went underground, specializing in independent toxicology analysis for clients who didn't want the police involved. I hammered on the metal door. A buzzer sounded. The lock clicked. I pushed inside, stumbling into the sterile, fluorescent-lit hallway. Talia was waiting for me at the end of the corridor. She was wearing a lab coat over pajama pants, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun. She took one look at me, barefoot, disheveled, shaking, and her expression shifted from annoyance to alarm. "Sierra," she whispered. "What happened?" I didn't have the breath to explain. I reached into my dress. I pulled out the plastic bag containing the smeared truffle. "Test it," I rasped. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears. "Test it for what?" she asked, taking the bag gingerly. "Everything," I said. "Test it for everything." She looked at the bag, then back at me. She didn't ask another question. She nodded and turned toward the sealed glass doors of her lab. "Give me 3 hours," she said. 3 hours. It felt like a life sentence. I sat on a hard plastic chair in the waiting area. My phone was vibrating in my clutch. I took it out. 52 missed calls, 30 from Richard, 22 from Julian. A text message from Richard popped up on the screen. "Honey, where are you? We're worried. You're not well. Come home." I stared at the words, "You're not well." That had been the narrative for months. I threw the phone into the metal trash can across the room. I couldn't look at it. I pulled my knees to my chest. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind a cold, hollow terror. And then the physical symptoms started. My head began to throb. A low, dull ache behind my eyes. My hands started to tremble uncontrollably. I felt foggy, disoriented. I realized with a jolt of horror that my body was craving the smoothie. I was going through withdrawal. I rocked back and forth, listening to the hum of the ventilation system. I replayed the last 6 months of my life. The missed deadlines, the forgotten names of key investors. The day I fell asleep during the budget review. I had cried in Richard's arms that night. "I'm losing my edge," I had told him. "Shhh," he had soothed, stroking my hair. "You're just burning out, Sierra. You need to let Julian handle the heavy lifting." Julian, who always handed me my morning glass with a smile. The door to the lab hissed open. I jumped, nearly falling out of the chair. Talia stood there. She wasn't holding the bag anymore. She was holding a tablet. Her face was gray. She didn't look like a scientist anymore. She looked like someone who had just seen a ghost. I stood up, my legs wobbling. "Tell me," I demanded. "Sierra," she said, her voice shaking. "You need to sit down." "I am not sitting down," I snapped. "Tell me what was in the chocolate." She walked over to a large monitor on the wall and synced her tablet. A complex chemical structure appeared on the screen. It looked like a spiderweb of lines and hexagons. "I found traces of high-grade dark chocolate, heavy cream, gold leaf," she began. She paused. "And a concentrated dose of CN9. The room went silent. "What is CN9? I asked. "It's a synthetic neurotoxin," Talia said, pointing to a cluster of red nodes on the screen. "It's experimental, strictly military application." She looked me dead in the eye. "It targets the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex." My blood ran cold. "What does it do, Talia?" "In small doses," she said. It induces temporary cognitive decline, short-term memory loss, confusion, fatigue, emotional instability. I grabbed the back of the chair to steady myself. It mimics early onset dementia, she whispered. The world tilted on its axis. The burnout, the brain fog, the mistakes, they weren't real. I wasn't losing my mind. I was being chemically lobotomized. If you take this consistently over a period of months, Talia continued, her voice gaining a frantic edge, the symptoms become permanent. But the most terrifying part is the compliance factor. Compliance? I choked out. It makes the subject suggestible, she said. Passive, it suppresses the will to fight. I felt bile rise in my throat. I turned away, retching dryly. They weren't trying to kill me, not yet. Death would trigger an investigation. Death would trigger the probate courts. They wanted me alive but incapacitated. They wanted me to be the crazy, burnt-out CEO who couldn't remember her own banking passwords. They wanted me to sign over the voting rights to the board. And I had almost done it. Just last week, Richard had brought the papers home. Just a temporary measure, honey, he had said. Until you feel like yourself again. I had held the pen in my hand. I had been so close to signing away the empire I spent 10 years building. Because I trusted them. Because I thought I was broken. I looked back at the monitor. The red nodes glowed like angry eyes. Is it? I hesitated. Is it in my system? Based on the concentration in that truffle? Talia said. If you've been ingesting this daily, your blood toxicity levels are likely lethal. She stepped closer to me. Sierra, if you had eaten that whole truffle tonight, with the alcohol in your system, it would have caused a cardiac arrest. It would have looked like a stress-induced heart attack. Beatrice hadn't just saved me from a stomach ache, she had saved my life. And now she was gone. My brother and my husband had taken her. They knew she knew. I looked at the trash can where my phone lay. The empire didn't matter anymore. The money didn't matter. My life was a crime scene and the perpetrators were the beneficiaries of my will. I looked at Talia. I need a blood test, I said, rolling up my sleeve. I need proof, hard proof. And then what? Talia asked, reaching for a tourniquet. You go to the police, I laughed. It was a cold, jagged sound. Richard plays golf with the police commissioner, I said. And Julian dates the district attorney's daughter. I watched the needle pierce my skin. I watched my dark red blood fill the vial. It was the fuel of my empire. And now it was the evidence of their betrayal. I'm not going to the police, I said, my voice hardening as the reality settled into my bones. I wasn't the victim anymore. The fog was lifting. The rage was burning through the chemical haze. I'm going to destroy them, I whispered. But first, I have to get Beatrice back. I'm Serafina Vance, 34 years old, and tonight I became a burglar in the glass tower I built from the ground up. I left Talia's lab with a band-aid on my arm and a vial of my own poisoned blood in her freezer. I drove the rattling rental car toward the financial district. The city was asleep. The streets were slick with mist. I looked up at the Vance Dynamics headquarters. It was a 40-story spire of steel and sustainable glass. It was supposed to be the future. Now it looked like a tombstone. I pulled into the underground garage, bypassing the executive lift. I parked in a visitor spot 3 levels down. I walked to the service elevator. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keycard twice. The withdrawal symptoms were coming in waves now. Nausea, sweats, a splitting headache that felt like a railroad spike driven between my eyes. I picked up the card. I held my breath. I pressed it against the reader. I hadn't been to the office in 3 weeks. Richard had insisted I rest at home. Access denied, the little red light seemed to mock me. My heart stopped. They had locked me out. Of course they had. I tried again. Red light. I leaned my forehead against the cold metal of the elevator door. I closed my eyes. Think Serafina, you built this system. You wrote the security protocols yourself 8 years ago. I reached into my purse and pulled out a frantic, crumpled list of overrides I kept in my head for emergencies. There was a master code, a hard override. I punched the keypad manually. 773491. A long pause, the mechanism groaned. The light turned green, the doors slid open. I stepped inside, my knees weak with relief and terror. I didn't press the button for the CEO suite on the 40th floor. If Richard was tracking my car, he might be tracking my office access too. I pressed 38, finance. The elevator climbed silently. My ears popped. I stepped out onto the 38th. It was a ghost town of cubicles and ergonomic chairs. The silence was heavy, pressurized. I walked past the rows of analysts' desks toward the corner office. Marcus, my CFO, my friend, the man who sat at my wedding table. His door was locked. I used the master code again. The lock clicked. I slipped inside and didn't turn on the lights. I worked by the glow of the city skyline bleeding through the floor to ceiling windows. I sat in his chair. It was still warm, or maybe that was my imagination. I woke up his computer. Password. Marcus was brilliant with numbers but sentimental with security. I typed in Chloe 2018. His daughter's name and birth year. The screen unlocked. I didn't breathe. I navigated straight to the raw transaction logs, not the polished reports he presented to the board, not the sanitized PDFs he emailed me with a smile. The live server data, I filtered by international outbound. The screen filled with rows. My stomach dropped. I scrolled. And scrolled and scrolled. It was a hemorrhage. Projected loss write-off. Consulting fee Shell Corp A Cayman. Logistics retainer Shell Corp B Switzerland. R&D sunk cost Shell Corp C Panama. The dates went back 6 months. They started exactly when my headaches began. I opened one of the transfer authorizations. There were 2 digital signatures at the bottom. One was Marcus. The other was Julian, my brother, my little brother whose tuition I paid. Whose gambling debts I wiped clean 3 times. I clicked on the transfer amount. $12 million sent last Tuesday. I clicked another. 8 million, another. 25 million. I pulled up the calculator on my phone, my fingers trembling violently. I did a rough sum of the last quarter alone. The number on the screen made me gag. $340 million. They weren't just skimming off the top. They were gutting the company. They were liquidating the assets and moving the cash offshore. I stared at the screen, the blue light stinging my tired eyes. I finally understood the endgame. They didn't just want power, they wanted to cash out. They were going to leave me as the CEO of a bankrupt husk. When the creditors came calling, I would be the one confused, demented, and legally responsible. I would go to prison for fraud, and they would be sipping martinis on a private island with my money. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. It was hot and angry. I wasn't sad. I was incinerated. I plugged a flash drive into the terminal. I began copying everything, every ledger, every email, every damning signature. The progress bar crawled across the screen. 20%, 40%. Suddenly, the overhead lights on the floor flickered on. I froze. I heard the heavy thud of the elevator doors opening down the hall. Security check, a voice called out. It wasn't old Jerry. It was a voice I didn't recognize. Deep, aggressive, I looked at the screen, 85%. Hello, the voice echoed closer. I see a terminal active in Office 302. I grabbed the mouse. I couldn't wait. I yanked the flash drive out at 92%. Corrupt files were better than no file. I dove under Marcus's heavy oak desk just as the door handle turned. I pressed my hand over my mouth. I squeezed my eyes shut. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Heavy boots stepped onto the carpet. A flashlight beam swept across the room. It cut through the darkness above my head. Must have been a glitch, the voice grumbled. He walked to the window. He stood there for a long moment. I could see the toes of his boots 6 inches from my face. I held my breath until my lungs burned. The CN9 withdrawal made my muscles twitch. I prayed to a god I hadn't spoken to in years. Don't let me spasm, don't let me cough. The radio on his belt crackled. Sector 4 clear, nothing here. He turned. He walked out, the door clicked shut. I didn't move for 10 minutes. I lay curled in a ball on the floor of the empire I had built, clutching a plastic drive that proved my entire family was trying to bury me. I crawled out. I didn't go back to the elevator. I took the fire stairs, 38 flights down. Barefoot, my feet bled, my lungs screamed. But as I burst out into the cool night air of the alleyway, one thought consumed me. I had the paper trail, I knew the poison, and I knew the theft. They thought I was the prey. They had no idea that the hunter had just woken up. I'm Serafina Vance, 34 years old, and tonight I am sitting in the dark of my $10 million penthouse waiting to destroy the man I married. I didn't turn on the lights. The only illumination came from the city glow filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. It cast long, skeletal shadows across the Italian marble floor. I sat in the high-backed velvet armchair facing the front door. My feet were raw and bloody from the 38 flights of stairs I had descended barefoot. My chest was heaving. The CN9 withdrawal was clawing at my insides. My skin felt like it was 2 sizes too tight for my body. A cold sweat slicked my hairline, but my mind was crystal clear. For the first time in 6 months, the fog was gone. Resting on my lap was a manila envelope. Inside was the printout Talia had forced into my hand before I left her lab and the flash drive I had stolen from Marcus's office. The toxicology report, and the financial ledger, the poison, and the motive. I heard the elevator ding in the hallway. My heart hammered against my ribs, painful and erratic. I forced my breathing to slow. In, out, I heard the heavy, confident footsteps approach the door. The keypad beeped. The lock tumbled. The door swung open, slicing a wedge of bright hallway light into the dark living room. Julian walked in. He looked impeccable. He was wearing the charcoal suit I bought him for our anniversary. He was adjusting his cufflinks, humming a low, mindless tune. He reached for the light switch. "Don't," I said. My voice was a rasp, dry as sandpaper. Julian froze. His hand hovered over the switch. He peered into the gloom. "Sierra," he called out, his voice pitching into that familiar, sickening concern. "Honey, why are you sitting in the dark? Is it a migraine?" He took a step toward me. "Did you take your medicine?" The word medicine made my stomach lurch. "I didn't take the truffle, Julian," I said. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. He stopped moving. He didn't ask what I meant. He didn't ask if I was hungry. He stood perfectly still, his silhouette framed by the light of the hallway. "I want to see Talia," I continued, my fingers tightening around the envelope until the edges crinkled. And then I went to the office. I threw the envelope onto the coffee table. It landed with a slap that echoed in the cavernous room. "It's all there, Julian, the CN9, the shell companies in Panama, the wire transfers." I leaned forward, the adrenaline overriding the nausea. "I know you're poisoning me," I whispered. "And I know you're stealing my company." I waited for the denial. I waited for the gaslighting. I expected him to rush over, feel my forehead, tell me I was having a psychotic break, and call the doctor he had on his payroll. I was ready to fight. I was ready to scream. But Julian didn't scream. He didn't rush. He simply lowered his hand from the light switch. He closed the door behind him, plunging us back into the semi-darkness. Then he laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It was a low, dry chuckle that made the hair on my arms stand up. He walked over to the wet bar. He poured himself a scotch. He didn't even look at me. I told Richard you were getting too lucid, he said, taking a slow sip. I told him the dose needed to be upped. My blood ran cold. He wasn't denying it. The mask of the doting husband, the man who held my hand during charity galas, the man who brought me soup in bed, just dissolved. In its place was a stranger with a cold, predatory smirk. Why? I choked out. I gave you everything. I put you on the board, I paid your debts. He turned to face me, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. You gave me an allowance, Sierra, he said, his voice dripping with contempt. You made me a pet, a husband trophy to stand next to the great Serafina Vance. He took a step closer. I could smell his cologne, sandalwood and betrayal. You're going to prison, I said, my voice shaking. I have the evidence. I'm going to the FBI in the morning. Julian took another sip. He looked bored. No, you're not. I have the logs, I insisted, standing up on my trembling legs. I have the proof of embezzlement. Embezzlement implies we took the money without authorization, he said calmly. He reached into his inside jacket pocket. He pulled out a folded document. He tossed it onto the coffee table next to my evidence. Read it. I looked down. It was a notarized document, proxy voting authorization. My eyes scanned the text. My breath hitched. It was a transfer of majority voting rights from Serafina Vance to Julian Vance, effective immediately due to medical incapacitation. At the bottom was a signature. It was my signature. It was shaky, looped, and barely legible, but it was mine. You signed that last Thursday, Julian said softly. During one of your foggy afternoons, you were very agreeable. You thought you were signing a birthday card for your niece. The room spun. I grabbed the back of the chair to keep from falling. This won't hold up, I stammered. I was drugged. It's fraud. Can you prove you were drugged last Thursday? He asked, tilting his head. Because according to Dr. Aris, you've been suffering from early onset paranoid dementia. This document is just a loving husband taking the burden off his sick wife. He finished his drink. He set the glass down on the table, right on top of the lab report. You're not the CEO anymore, Sierra, he said. You're just a liability. He checked his watch. Richard is coming over with the security team in an hour to escort you to a specialized facility. For your own safety, of course. He smiled. It was the smile of a man who had already won. Pack a bag, darling, but don't pack anything sharp. He turned and walked toward the bedroom, whistling that same tune. I stood there in the dark. My empire was gone. My home was a prison. My husband was a monster. I looked at the glass he had left on the table. He thought I was broken. He thought I was finished. I looked at the heavy crystal decanter on the bar. I looked at the back of his head as he walked away. The nausea vanished. The shaking stopped. They had taken my company. They had taken my health, but they had made one fatal miscalculation. They left me in the room with them. I picked up the heavy glass decanter. I wasn't Serafina the CEO anymore. I wasn't Serafina the wife. I was something entirely new, and I was going to make sure Julian never whistled again. I'm Serafina Vance, 34 years old, and I just watched my husband steal my billion-dollar company through a pane of bulletproof glass. I didn't swing the crystal decanter at Julian's head. I wanted to. God, I wanted to shatter his skull and wipe that arrogant smirk off his face. But in that split second, clarity pierced through my rage. If I struck him, I would be the violent, unstable woman he was painting me to be. If I struck him, I would end up in a padded cell, and he would have full custody of my assets by noon. So I dropped the decanter. It smashed against the marble floor, exploding into 1,000 glittering shards. While he flinched, I ran. I grabbed the manila envelope from the table. I bolted out the door. I didn't wait for the elevator. I took the service stairs again, my adrenaline masking the pain in my bleeding feet. I spent the night in a 24-hour laundromat 3 blocks away, clutching the evidence to my chest like a lifeline. I watched the sun rise over the city I used to own. I didn't sleep, I planned. At 7:45 a.m., I walked into the lobby of the Vance Tower. I was still wearing yesterday's clothes. My hair was pulled back in a severe, messy knot. I didn't look like a CEO. I looked like a wreckage, but I walked with my chin up. I approached the security turnstiles. I pulled out my key card, the same key card that had granted me access to the secrets of the Fortune 500 for a decade. I tapped it against the sensor. Beep. A harsh red light flashed. Access DENIED. I tried again. Access DENIED. My stomach dropped. Ms. Vance, I looked up. It was Henry, the head of lobby security. He was a man whose daughter's college tuition I had paid for last year. He wouldn't look me in the eye. Henry, I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. My card is malfunctioning, let me through. I can't do that, ma'am, he whispered, staring at his boots. Henry, I am the CEO of this company. Not as of this morning, ma'am, he said softly. The memo went out at 6:00 a.m. Strict orders from Mr. Vance. You're listed as a security threat. A threat, I laughed. It was a sharp, jagged sound. Let me in, Henry. Or I will cause a scene that will make the evening news. He hesitated. He looked at the other guards who were shifting uncomfortably. I'm sorry, Serafina, he murmured, using my first name for the first time in 5 years. He swiped his MasterCard. The gate opened. Don't make me regret this. I didn't look back. I sprinted to the elevators. I hit the button for the 40th floor. The doors slid open and I stepped into the executive foyer. Silence. The receptionist's desk was empty. I could see straight down the hallway to the main boardroom. The fishbowl, I called it. I had designed it with floor-to-ceiling glass walls to symbolize transparency. I wanted my employees to see that I had nothing to hide. Now that transparency was my torture. I walked toward the glass doors. 2 large men in dark suits, private security, not my usual team, stepped in front of the handles. They crossed their arms. They were walls of muscle. I stopped inches from their chests. Move, I commanded. They didn't blink. I looked past them through the glass. The entire board was there. 12 people I had hand-picked, 12 people who had toasted at my wedding, and at the head of the table stood Julian. He looked fresh, rested. He was wearing a navy suit, standing tall, projecting an image of somber strength. He was speaking, gesturing to a projection on the smart glass wall behind him. I read the words on the slide. Emergency Transition Protocol, Interim Leadership. My knees nearly buckled. He wasn't just stealing it, he was erasing me. I slammed my open palm against the glass. Julian, I screamed. The sound didn't penetrate the soundproof barrier, but the vibration did. He stopped talking. He turned his head slowly. He looked right at me. He didn't look afraid. He didn't look guilty. He looked at me with a pitying, sad expression, a performance for the board members watching him. He mouthed 2 words, "Go home." Then he turned back to the table, tapped a button on his remote, and the glass wall turned opaque, frosting over, blocking me out. White silence replaced the view of my life's work. Ms. Vance, one of the guards grunted, grabbing my upper arm. We have orders to escort you off the premises. Police are on the way. I yanked my arm back. Don't touch me, I hissed. I backed away. I stared at the frosted glass. I had the toxicology report in my bag. I had the financial records. But in that building, in that moment, facts didn't matter. Power did, and I had just lost mine. 10 minutes later, I was standing on the sidewalk. The bustling city moved around me. Cars honked. People rushed to work. I stood frozen, staring up at the gleaming steel tower that bore my family name. I was a billionaire on paper, but I was a ghost in reality. I reached into my pocket and gripped the flash drive. Julian thought he had won because he controlled the room. He forgot that I built the building. He forgot that I knew where the bodies were buried because I was the one who dug the graves. I turned away from the tower. I wasn't going to the police. Julian owned them. I wasn't going to the doctors. Julian paid them. I flagged down a taxi. Where to? The driver asked. I looked at the envelope in my lap. The docks, I said, District 4. If I was going to take down a monster, I needed to visit the devil first. I'm Serafina Vance, 34 years old, and I am currently standing in a puddle of motor oil wearing a $3,000 suit, hunting for the only person in this city who hates my husband as much as I do. The taxi driver refused to pull into the parking lot of the Starlight Motel. He dropped me on the corner of District 4, eyeing my pearl earrings with a mixture of concern and greed. I didn't blame him. This was the part of the city where dreams went to die, and apparently where former executive assistants went to hide. I walked toward the peeling neon sign. My heels clicked rhythmically on the cracked asphalt. The sound was too loud in the heavy, humid air. I clutched my bag tighter against my side. I wasn't scared of the drug dealers watching me from the shadows. I was scared of what I was about to find behind door number 9. Beatrice crumbled 6 months ago. She had been the CFO's right hand, sharp, efficient, invisible. Then overnight she was gone, fired for gross misconduct involving heroin found in her desk drawer. I had signed her termination papers myself. Julian had handed them to me, shaking his head, talking about the tragedy of hidden addictions. I had believed him. I had believed everything. I stopped in front of the rusted metal door. The number 9 was hanging by a single screw. I took a breath that tasted like exhaust fumes and stale beer. I knocked. 3 sharp raps. Silence. I knocked again, harder. Beatrice, it's Serafina. A rustle inside, then the sound of a deadbolt sliding. The door cracked open 2 inches, held by a chain. A single eye peered out from the darkness. It was bloodshot, rimmed with dark purple circles. Go away, a raspy voice hissed. I need to talk to you, B. They sent you, she whimpered, her voice trembling. I told them I wouldn't talk. I haven't said a word to anyone. Nobody sent me, I said, leaning close to the gap. Julian stole the company this morning. I'm on the street just like you. The eye widened. She hesitated. Then slowly the chain rattled. The door creaked open. The smell hit me first. Unwashed laundry, cheap vodka, and fear. I stepped inside. Beatrice stood by the window, clutching a dirty blanket around her thin shoulders. She looked 20 years older than the woman I remembered. Her hair was matted. Her skin was gray. He did it, she whispered. He actually did it. He did. I locked the door behind me. He declared me mentally incompetent, paranoid dementia. Beatrice let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She sank onto the edge of the bed. The mattress was stained yellow and sagging in the middle. That was the plan, she said, staring at the floor. Plan B, Plan A was to have you overdose, but Julian said it was too messy. He didn't want the police investigation. My blood ran cold. I felt the room tilt. Overdose? I choked out. Beatrice, look at me. She looked up, tears streaming down her hollow cheeks. I heard them, Sierra. 6 months ago, I was working late, organizing the Cayman accounts. Julian and Marcus, the CFO, they were in the office next door, the ventilation vent. You can hear everything. She began to rock back and forth. They were laughing about how easy it was to slip the scopolamine into your tea. They were debating which doctor to bribe for the diagnosis. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I tried, she screamed, startling me. She jumped up, pacing the tiny room. I sent an anonymous email to HR. I tried to leave a note on your desk, but Marcus caught me. He saw me near your office. She stopped pacing and looked at her arms. The next day, security found the heroin. They told me if I ever spoke to you, they'd make sure I went to prison for distribution. They said they'd plan enough on me to put me away for life. She collapsed back onto the mattress. I was scared, Sierra. I'm just a secretary. You were the CEO, but you were blind. You were so in love with him. The truth of her words hit me like a physical blow. I had been blind. I had signed her termination without asking a single question. I had let them destroy this woman because it was convenient for my husband. I walked over to the bed. I didn't care about the stains. I didn't care about the grime. I sat down next to her. The springs groaned under our weight. Two women discarded by the same man, one stripped of her reputation, the other stripped of her mind. I looked at the peeling wallpaper. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, but I didn't wipe it away. Inside my chest, the panic was receding. The fear of the morning, the board meeting, the guards, the humiliation was evaporating. It was being replaced by something else, something harder, something useful. I looked at Beatrice. She was shaking. I have the files, she whispered. I froze. What? I didn't just listen, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. Before they escorted me out, I backed up the Cayman Drive, the real one, not the one they show the IRS. She reached under the mattress. She pulled out a small, silver USB drive. I was going to use it for leverage, she said softly, to buy my life back, but I was too scared to use it. She held it out to me, her hand was trembling. Take it, please, just make him stop. I closed my fingers around the cold metal. It felt heavy. It felt like a weapon. I looked at Beatrice, really looked at her. I'm not going to make him stop, I said. My voice was steady, deadly calm. I felt a spark ignite in my gut, a cold, calculating rage that burned hotter than any fear I had ever known. It wasn't the hot, messy anger of a scorned wife. It was the precise, surgical fury of a CEO who had found the error in the code. I'm going to burn him to the ground, I said, and I'm going to use his own money to buy the matches. I stood up. I held out my hand to her. Get your coat, Beatrice, we have work to do. She looked at my hand, then she looked at my face. She saw the monster I had just become, and for the first time in 6 months, she smiled. She took my hand. Julian thought he had removed the liability. He had no idea he had just introduced the virus into the system. I'm Serafina Vance, 34 years old, and I am about to light a match that will burn $3 billion to ash in less than 60 seconds. Beatrice and I sat in a 24-hour internet cafe that smelled like stale popcorn and ozone. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like trapped flies. I didn't care about the sticky keyboard or the teenager playing a shooter game 3 seats down. I only cared about the black terminal window blinking on the screen in front of me. I cracked my knuckles. My hands weren't shaking anymore. They were steady instruments of destruction. 5 years ago, when I first coded the proprietary algorithm for Sterling Skin's logistics network, I built a back door. It wasn't a mistake. It was an insurance policy. I called it the dead hand. It was a hard-coded access tunnel hidden beneath layers of firewall encryption that not even our CTO knew existed. I typed the IP address into the browser. The screen went black. A single prompt appeared in green text, identify. I typed my mother's maiden name backwards. Access granted. I took a deep breath. The air in the cafe felt thin, insufficient for the magnitude of what I was doing. I inserted the flash drive Beatrice had given me. Then I inserted my own drive, the one containing the toxicology reports proving our flagship serum was poisoning our customers. I looked at Beatrice. She was watching the screen, her eyes wide with terror and awe. Are you sure, Sierra? She whispered. Once you do this, there's no going back, you'll be broke. I'm already broke, B, I said, my voice flat. Julian just doesn't know it yet. I began the upload. I routed the data through 3 proxy servers in Estonia and Singapore. Destination: the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the FDA tip line. I hit enter. A progress bar appeared. Uploading, 20%, 50%. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. Sent. Now for the money. I switched tabs to my personal brokerage interface, accessing it through the dead hand backdoor to bypass the freeze Julian had likely placed on my accounts. I saw the numbers, my portfolio, my shares in Sterling Skin, 51% of the company, my life's work quantified in digital gold. I didn't hesitate. I didn't let myself think about the sleepless nights, the missed holidays, the years I spent building this empire brick by brick. I typed the command sell all, limit market. I authorized the liquidation of every single asset attached to my social security number, real estate holdings, bonds, and millions of shares of Sterling Skin. I hovered my finger over the execution key. I thought of Julian's face in the boardroom. I thought of the pity in his eyes. I pressed the key. Order executed. The reaction was almost instant. I pulled up the live market ticker on my phone. At first, nothing happened. Then a small dip. Then the algorithms kicked in. High-frequency trading bots sensed the massive dump of volume and panic sold to match it. The line on the graph turned red. It angled down, then it fell off a cliff. "Oh my God," Beatrice gasped, covering her mouth. I watched the number next to the ticker symbol STRS, $145, $120, $98.50. It was free falling. My phone started buzzing. Notifications from news apps began to populate the top of the screen. Breaking: Sterling Skin whistleblower leaks toxic reports. Alert: Sterling Skin stock halts trading after 40% crash. Urgent: FDA announces immediate investigation into Serafina Vance's empire. I watched my net worth evaporate. Millions of dollars disappeared every time I blinked. I felt a strange, cold euphoria washing over me. It was the feeling of cutting off a gangrenous limb. It hurt, but it was the only way to survive. The cafe was quiet, but inside my head, sirens were blaring. I imagine the chaos in the boardroom right now. I imagine Julian's phone exploding with calls from panicked investors. I imagine the color draining from his face as he realized the crown he had just stolen was made of lead. He wanted the company, he could have it. He could have the lawsuits. He could have the federal investigations. He could have the bankruptcy hearings. I watched the stock hit $42. I was destroying my own legacy, tearing down the monument I had built to myself. But as the numbers turned to dust, I felt lighter. I wasn't the CEO anymore. I wasn't the victim, I was the executioner. I pulled the flash drives from the computer. "Come on," I said to Beatrice, standing up. She looked at me stunned. "Where are we going?" I looked at the screen one last time. Sterling Skin was trading at $28, junk status. "We need to find a television," I said, a dark smile touching my lips. "I want to watch him explain this." I'm Serafina Vance, 34 years old, and I am watching the man who tried to erase my existence get erased by the consequences of his own greed. I sat on the floor of a studio apartment in Queens that smelled faintly of boiled cabbage and floor wax. My laptop was balanced on a stack of cardboard boxes. On the screen, a grainy, black and white video feed flickered. It was the interior of the penthouse master bedroom, the room where I had spent months sleeping off the migraines that were actually slow drip poisonings. I had one backdoor left, one final eye inside the castle I had built. I watched Julian. He was frantic. He had thrown a Louis Vuitton duffel bag onto the silk sheets. His movements were jerky, like a marionette with tangled strings. I saw him sweep an arm across the dresser, sending bottles of cologne and a heavy crystal vase shattering to the floor. He didn't flinch at the sound. He was too busy shoving stacks of cash into the bag. He grabbed his passport. He grabbed a hard drive, the decoy one, the one he thought was clean. I zoomed in on his face. Even through the pixelation of the security feed, I could see the sweat glistening on his forehead. He was pale, a ghostly shade of gray that matched the silk of his tie. He was muttering to himself. I imagined he was rehearsing his lies. It was Serafina. She's unstable. She's the one who cooked the books. But the lies wouldn't work this time. Beatrice's flash drive had done its work. The toxicology report from my hair follicles had been sent directly to the district attorney 3 hours ago. The evidence of the scopolamine purchases, traced back to a shell company in his name, was irrefutable. He wasn't just facing securities fraud. He was facing attempted murder. I took a sip of lukewarm coffee from a chipped mug. My hand was perfectly steady. On the screen, Julian froze. He looked toward the bedroom door. I couldn't hear the sound through the feed, but I knew what he was hearing. The heavy, rhythmic thud of a battering ram against the reinforced mahogany front door. The shout of federal agents clearing the hallway. FBI, open up. Julian dropped a stack of hundreds. They fluttered to the floor like dead leaves. He looked at the window. For a second, I thought he might try to run. I thought he might try to jump. But Julian was a coward. He was a parasite who couldn't survive without a host, and his host had just cut him off. The bedroom door splintered inward. 6 agents in tactical gear flooded the room. The contrast was jarring, the violence of the raid against the soft, cream-colored luxury of the room I had designed. Julian raised his hands. He looked small. Surrounded by the men with guns, stripped of his arrogance, he looked like exactly what he was, a thief who had been caught with his hand in the jar. They spun him around. They shoved him against the wall, face pressed into the expensive wallpaper. I saw the handcuffs click. I saw him shouting something, his face twisted in a rictus of panic, but nobody was listening. They hauled him up. One agent grabbed the duffel bag, evidence now, not an escape plan. They marched him out of the frame. The room was empty again, just a messy bed and a shattered vase on the floor. I reached out and pressed a key, disconnect. The screen went black. I closed the laptop. It was over. I stood up and walked to the sliding glass door. It jammed halfway, requiring a solid shove to open, a far cry from the silent, motorized glass walls of the penthouse. I stepped out onto the balcony. It was barely big enough for a single plastic chair. The view wasn't Central Park. It was a maze of fire escapes, brick alleyways, and laundry lines strung between buildings. But the air was crisp. It was cold and sharp, biting at my cheeks, filling my lungs with a shocking clarity. It tasted like morning. It tasted like survival. I leaned against the rusted railing and looked east, where the sun was just beginning to bleed orange light over the skyline. I checked my bank account on my phone. The balance was 4 figures, not 8, not 9. Just enough to pay rent on this place for 6 months and buy groceries. My stock in Sterling Skin was worthless. The company I had spent 10 years building was radioactive, its assets frozen, its reputation incinerated. I had burned down my own house to kill the rat inside the walls. Most people would be devastated. Most people would be mourning the loss of the private jets, the galas, the power. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't grief. It was a heartbeat, strong, unencumbered, clean. I wasn't Serafina the CEO anymore. I wasn't Serafina the victim. I was just Serafina. I looked at my hands. These were the hands that wrote the code that revolutionized logistics for the entire industry. These were the hands that built an empire from a dorm room laptop. Julian had taken my money. He had taken my trust. He had almost taken my sanity. But he couldn't take my mind. He couldn't take the engine that drove the machine. I looked at the sunrise, watching the light hit the water towers on the roofs across the street. I had nothing left but my freedom and my brain. In looking out at the city, realizing that the fog of the poison was finally, truly gone, I smiled. I knew something Julian never understood. Money is just a byproduct. Resilience is the asset. I turned back toward the dark apartment. I had a laptop. I had an internet connection. I had a new idea starting to form in the back of my mind, something sharper, leaner, and impossible to steal. I pulled the door shut behind me. The empire was ash. It was time to build the phoenix.